Recently, in various formats and in various different kinds of material contexts and in various genres and in various forms, I've been discussing the way that although in reader response theory and in the poetics of postmodernist projects, such as language poetry, there's often an explicit nod to the idea of a work in which reader and author participate in a kind of communicative and evolving production and process-oriented elaboration of what might be constituted by the word the work, although certainly the edges and the parameters of whatever process we're talking about exceeds the idea of work. But I've been talking about how that abstract conceptualization remains largely metaphorical, particularly in instances in which the work takes on an embodiment as a physical form that's either located in a volume that might be called a book or a collection or anthology or whatever it is. Once it's materialized in that form and sold, either online or in a bookstore, depending on your space-time access to bookstores or your technological access to the internet, or both, or if that work, if we're not talking about language, if we're talking about, because visualizations, right, like this visualization that I'm pointing at here, can become icons that are used in all different kinds of ways, and those are communicative acts as well, right, that involve messages and content and all of the other aspects that communication entails. So, when these visual images are housed in loci, such as museums or galleries or spaces of observation, again, largely that audience participation and communicative engagement back and forth between viewer and the creator of the viewed, these subjectivities remain metaphorical or abstract. I had an early piece that was one of the poems in, I think it was Miniature Life, but it may have been another collection, in which, I jokingly make a remark, the art, said hello. And it's that, kind of engagement that I've wanted to work with in the way that I build, in the way that I make, in the way that I communicate. And that's probably one of the reasons why I don't make books even when I'm making books. Now, that's a strange statement, but when I make a book, the intention of the book is to get the information into a space or space-time or a relationship to a socially constructed arena of communication. And then once the work is there, once the material of the language, the textualization is there, then I can manipulate responses to it in space-time. And so, whether the work, enters into a volume of, a poetry magazine, or whether it enters into cyberspace in a form of a collection or whatever, the point at which it departs from me is just a moment, like launching into space of a capsule. Now the function, is various, right? So when you send a satellite into orbit, you have certain intentions for that satellite, and of course, when we send and once the Hubble telescope is launched into the deepest reaches of outer space, its intention is to capture images, and record information about the universe, and in a similar way, the material launching of the works that I've produced in traditional forms, like books and things like that, are intended, for similar purposes, to gather information and to create dialogues and dialectics in non-conventional and non-traditional ways that utilize a variety of different forms and means of signification to communicate. And in that way, they're both similar to the Voyager project and very antithetical to the Voyager project, because the communication is not intended to represent our world, to some distant alien other from another experiential plane, but rather to represent our world to ourselves, and to represent ourselves to our world. So in that sense, the idea of seeing as that is elaborated by Wittgenstein, and that I've used for a number of decades as a way of exploring dimensions of epistemology and development of more and more complex understandings of our world and our relationship to it is both the launching point and the goal, paradoxically, in the same way that the golden spiral is both the center of everything and doesn't really exist anywhere. So that is enough of a background to begin talking about the way that some of these acts of communication might occur. So we'll begin here. So recently I received from some intelligent entity the message, Queen of the slipscreen, and I thought about that idea, and the slipscreen, and the slipscreen in physical space, the movement of the fluid behind a moving object, and the way that fluid in motion creates a dynamic that facilitates the motion of other objects within that slipscreen. And I thought about the ways that in engineering, the mechanics of certain craft, have been designed to facilitate this idea of a slipstream. And, so I thought about these World War II airplanes known as Hawker Hurricanes, I believe they are, and they belong to the fleet, or I don't know, you don't call it a fleet, whatever you call aircraft. I guess you call it a fleet. The fleet of the British Royal Air Force, and this is their insignia. So I thought about the Hawker Hurricanes and their design, and I thought about what do you call this, rondelle? I thought about the rondelles of the Royal Air Force, the British Royal Air Force. Now these rondelles were developed. They're sort of color inverted images of the French rondelles, right? Which would have the blue circle at the center, and then the red, the white would remain the same, and then the outer circle would be defined by the outer concentric circle would be defined by a red ring, and this rondelle as a sign and a symbol was very interesting to me for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is because we're approaching Navaratri and the celebration of Ma Devi in the form of Durga, and the 9 forms of Durga that the Mother Goddess is embodied in this particular entity, and without intending any disrespect, because I have nothing but respect for all of the forms of Ma Devi, but I have often in my own representation of particularly the Hindu representations of the feminine divine, thought of these forms as examples of a kind of set theory. So Ma Durga herself is an avatar of the Divine Mother, and then there are forms of Durga, just as there are other forms of the Divine Mother, and the way that these sets of avatars belong to one another and traverse one another, to me is a representation of a kind of complexity of the metaphysics of universe, and the way that we belong to universe, and of the complexities of our own relationship to divinity, as well as the gendered forms of divinity, and the multiplicities of that exist within those forms. So you think of, okay, so the divine feminine, but the divine feminine is always already complexly and vastly multiple and heterogeneous, right? So to me, that's a sophisticated way of thinking about the sacred, and not certainly the only reason that Ma Durga has become important to me, but one of the ways that I explore those energies is belongs to that set of ideas. So anyway, this rondelle, which belongs to the British Royal Air Force and certainly was never intended to be a representation of a mandala, nevertheless reminds me of mandalas, and because it reminds me of mandalas, it reminds me of this approaching celebration, for which, a lot of preparation is required, and I'm, certainly not ready. But I'm never really ready, for these moments, and that's part of the participation as improvisation, right? So that you try to be ready, but you recognize that you won't be, and sometimes you'll miss the event, or sometimes the event will come out a lot differently than you anticipate. But anyway, so it reminded me of that, but then it also reminded me that that recently that I posted something on a site for the Ohana Music Festival, which occurred at Dana Point, which is a location not too far from where I grew up in Southern California, and I posted a response to a performance by the group Pearl Jam, in which I jokingly referred to it as the best Talking Heads song since Slippery People. It's called Dance of the Clairvoyants, and it very much does remind me of a Talking Head song. But I also referenced a statement that I had made, and that Eddie Vedder, who I went to high school with, had remembered years later after I had entirely forgotten the statement. And I fit that act of communication, which was made probably sometime in 1981, I imagine. I fit it into the name of this particular location in space, Dana Point. I referred to the Arabic word for a kind of pearl, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Dana or Dana maybe, which I understand in Arabic means the most perfectly sized, valuable, and beautiful pearl. So I took this statement that I had made in 1981, and I changed it slightly, and I used the word Dana or Dana in Dana Point, and I transformed it into a reference to a kind of transfigured re-inscription of the name of the band, the Pearl Jam. So that process involved in communication reminded me of these issues that I'm addressing. But then the insignia itself, the rondel, and the use of the rondel, which I don't really understand in this festival and what its significance is, but it also led me to a lot of different references in the way that I've made art. And in fact, that Hawker hurricane that I mentioned, one of the designs for the British Royal Air Force of these types of planes that utilize well-designed engineering construction to effectively take advantage of slipstream and taper its consequences, was designed by the manufacturer Beechcraft. And only really close readers of my work will remember this, but well, I don't know if maybe I haven't even mentioned it yet. Well, the original spacecraft that I designed as a form of advertisement was a kind of it was an advertisement in which the structure of questions were used to advertise, and this I made in must have been 1978 or 1977, and this advertisement was for a space travel device that projected itself in the form of light. So it moved forward, and it did so by converting its physical substance into light, and like a cinematic projector projecting itself as light forward towards its destination, and this began with an advertisement from a magazine that was made by Beechcraft. And Beechcraft, even at that time, and talking about travel and non military vehicles and aircraft, used the term Baron to describe their pilots. Fly with a Beechcraft Baron. Now, I don't know whether Beechcraft still markets this way or not, but at that time they marketed their pilots as Baron, and they were referring to this kind of like glorious historical colonial past, and certainly if you're gonna be involved in a war, it might as well be World War II, and you might as well be fighting fascists, right? But they continue to sort of exploit like that myth of Beechcraft heroism, as if their relationship to these to the production of these aircraft were anything more than money making ventures. But I used this Beechcraft ad, and it was the basis for my first space travel machine. And I hesitate to call it a space time travel machine, because at that time I wasn't really conceiving of the work moving in that direction, and it only became later when I would re-engage, some of these early serial pieces and place them in relationship with other acts of communication and signification, that I entirely realized the way that the manufacture of a kind of communication could explore time as well as space, as I'm doing in this piece, referencing a number of different ideas, referencing a moment in 1981 with Eddie Vedder, who was Eddie Mueller then, and making this comment about without saying too much about the context of that particular content, that involved angels. And it was probably in like a Bob's Big Boy or a Denny's or some other coffee shop. It may have been in Encinitas, or it may have been in Oceanside. I honestly can't remember, because I can't remember the line. It was only years later when a different friend reminded me that I had said this about the angels, and nobody caring about angels anymore, that and that Eddie had remembered this line years later, and I don't think my friend remembered it either, but Eddie apparently did. And so I referenced this this line and transformed this line, and in seeing the symbol, and in being able to connect, the different moments of, this these moments in space-time and these particular forms of communication, right? It's different than writing about the history of Hawker hurricanes in a book, isn't it? It's quite different, and it even goes quite beyond anything that Marcel Proust proposes in Search of Lost Time, or Remembrance of Things Past, depending on how you translate it from the French. So imagine that dot is blue in the center, and the outer concentric circle is red at this particular moment. But it not only acts as an aid to memory, it embodies, the materiality of memory. It begins to understand ways in which our production of ourselves, across and within and beyond, certain confinements of our conceptualizations of space-time are manipulable, right? And if that's the case, and if our understandings can move from a locus or a series of loci like this, in which we seem to be bound by the singularity, or the limited dimensionality of the red field, through the manipulation of our understanding and conceptual organization, we can see beyond that to the red field as a dot within some white plane. And as our understanding of these kind of positions increases, now we can see the red dot as a positionality within a larger white circle, bound by an even larger blue concentric circle within the frame of an image placed within a larger image, which happens to be an image of our own world as seen from outer space.